there's a part of us as men that can really get pulled into that vortex of earning and provider anxiety. And I see it with what I call the more white collar athletes that I work. I use that term, white collar athletes, just to say that like they work in very demanding environments where it's hyper competitive and like the heat is really turned up in a place like Wall Street where you're constantly looking over your shoulder, making sure you're not getting outmanned, and then there's so much money that involved that it amps up that competitiveness that a lot of men have, and the aggressiveness and the self-reliance. So it's hard to get out of that because you feel a guy will feel like a failure if they do that. That is on them in some ways, because you're right, at a certain point they have enough food on the table. What's the extra income going to do for their family?
Welcome to another episode of Unlatched Mind. So my guest today is Dr. Jett Stone. Dr. Stone is a clinical psychologist. His focus is really men's health, and that's how I found him. I came across a couple of his articles. One was called, and one that kind of frames our discussion was titled "The Male Breadwinner's Dilemma," and it really just he sort of gets into the mind of a male and guys and the struggles that a lot of guys go through. Many of which, myself included, are not really good at recognizing those struggles and parsing them and understanding them and dealing with them in a healthy manner. So, and it crosses all sorts of things: family, school, life, work, relationships, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, great discussion. I think we need to have more of these discussions. So with that, let's go. Dr. Jett Stone, appreciate your time. I really do. I found you like I found a lot of folks. I think of things that I find interesting, and I start searching, and then I come across some content, and I say, "Oh, that guy seems cool. That gal seems cool." And I look you guys up, and here we are. So the blog that I found that triggered my interest for you was titled "The Male Breadwinner's Dilemma," and it's on your psychologytoday.com blog. But before we jump into all that, maybe a little bio on yourself and who you are. Sort of thing.
Sure. Great to be on here, Vinny.
Cool.
Thanks for having me. I'm a clinical psychologist, an early career clinical psychologist. I'm based out of New York and Connecticut. I mainly do psychotherapy with adults. I do individual psychotherapy and couples psychotherapy. I have a niche area in men's mental health and psychotherapy with men. That there's a personal story to that, and there's a professional story. The professional one is that I did a large chunk of my training in the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Manhattan, where I got the opportunity, the privilege to work with a range of men facing a range of different issues. And from trauma and anxiety to depression, these were men and also women, but it's a larger proportion of them were men who Vietnam veterans, Iraqi war veterans, and it gave me insight into the inner workings of men and virtuous masculinity and masculinity that could be destructive, and the whole spectrum. And I took that into my professional career and developed a practice based around providing an open space for men to work on their issues. And I think that there are cultural differences between men and women. Of course, there's tons of maybe more similarities than differences, but I wanted to create a space for men to be emotionally open, and it became part of my life's work to do that.
Well, it's a huge need there. I mean, I know we spoke briefly, when we first had a quick chat, it was a couple of weeks ago now, but yeah, it's not easy for us, right? I mean, it's especially, and I told you a little bit my personal story with my dad. We as a kid, I was in the VA hospitals a lot. My dad was there a lot, right? Vietnam and all the trauma that followed that. Yeah. I know what those hospitals look like. I know what those patients go through. I lived it. And those are men, just speaking in the men's, circles, those are hard men that, are even more probably closed off in screw that, work harder, no one cares, that, that kind of sentiment. And what I'm learning at 45 years old, man, there's some good to that. You want to be tough. You want there's an absolute role for that. But man, that can go too far, and it's just not good. It's not good.
It can, and I'm learning it too. I am not the paragon of a healthy masculinity. I'm working on being better myself, and I'm doing so alongside, in collaboration with the male clients that I see on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, interesting. Well, no, I appreciate the work. And now the blog, have you just started that? I know you got a couple posts up there. Is that something you just began, or what's the? Why did you start the blog? Was it just to augment your work, sort of thing? And
yeah, it was to augment my work, and I felt that there was a real need to capture the emotional worlds, the souls, what I call the souls of men. There's a lot of stuff out there in the media about men, a lot of opinions, a lot of hot takes. And I felt like I had the unique opportunity to be sitting down with men on a daily basis and sort of being a guide as they discover parts of themselves that maybe they hadn't spoken about before. So I wanted to share that in a blog. I wanted to capture the humanity of men. I think at times men can be labeled in limiting, rigid ways. We could do that ourselves too. So this blog is all about providing color and humanity to the inner experience of men. And I have a writing background, and post-COVID, well, not post-COVID, we're still in it. Who knows? Yeah. But I wanted to. I have a little bit more time now along with my practice to start writing, and I just wanted to do that. I wanted to share this part of my life that I'm working with men for a wider audience.
Now,
I used to work at
Go ahead.
Sorry, I used to work in psychology today too.
Interesting.
Prior to becoming a psychologist, I was an editorial intern there, so I have a soft spot for that magazine and the blogs.
Yeah, it's a great platform. I mean, it's just they do a great job of rolling up a lot of the kind of intellectuals like yourself that are really into the field for kind of laymen like me, and just a couple page summary. And it's like, and it's just digestible, and so they do a really good job of whoever the editors are, they do a good job of keeping that. Now, do you get pushback? And we'll jump into the details of the blog in a second. But in general, a man writing about sort of trying to help men, and because I think with the trends, and we kind of spoke about this when we first chatted, but obviously society we're at a certain point in society where it could be a touchy thing when you talk about gender, especially when you try to whether it's or discuss the pros or back up the male. You hear the male patriarchy. You hear a lot of it's much easier and more socially acceptable to talk about how we can enhance women's rights and all the things like that, which absolutely we all agree with. Well, most of us do, except psychos. But you're kind of taking the other option. Well, let's not forget men. Like there's a lot of stuff, right, that we're almost sometimes don't think we're okay. It's okay to talk about, or society's thinking, well, yeah, men are fine. They've been running the world forever. Why are you trying to help them? Like you can almost hear that in some of the back room sort of thing. I mean, you get any pushback with this, especially as a man?
I wish I was well known enough to get a ton of pushback. I've gotten a lot of feedback from the articles that I have written on Psychology Today, and there have been some good critiques of it, and there have been some pushback, at least in the social media sense of it. But I've made this choice to enter into territory that can be controversial at times, and I understand that. But my belief is that, and it's aligned with what a therapist, famous therapist, Esther Perel, had said about men. She said, the lives of women will not change until the lives of men come along. And, that if we want to create loving men, we have to love men. That is not from me either. That's from a writer, Bell Hooks. So those two things I sort of am sharing with you because I don't believe we are helping any gender-related cause by ignoring the inner life of men. So to me, that is important. I have 2 daughters, right? And so the work that I'm doing, what I'm writing about in Psychology Today, in an indirect way, is helping build a more equitable life for them as they grow into women. And so to me, I don't feel like what I'm doing is, I don't consider myself a men's rights person. I just don't. I consider myself someone who wants to uplift everyone. And I think that I have insight into what's going on with men. Yeah. And I think that's part of the picture, that we need each other. And all genders need each other. But specifically, the duality of men and women, I think that in order to thrive, we have to love one another. And I hope that what I write comes from that place.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it comes through in your writing. Yeah, there's an air of compassion throughout the whole thing, which I think we need more of. I really do. Right? There's a nuance to every statement, and I feel like the nuance in your statement is always, well, the reason I'm talking about how men need to be heard more about X, Y, Z is because then they'll express themselves better, be better husbands, be better dads, and it just contribute to the whole better. That does come across in your writing for sure. So yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So jumping into the blog, again, titled the Male Breadwinner's Dilemma. So I saw that title and I said, that's interesting. It automatically started resonating with me. So I'm like, let me dig into that a little bit. So there's an opening line you have that I just want to start with and just have you kind of pick apart. You say there's a growing call for men to more fully join with women in the unpaid labor at home to activate women's success in the workplace, set an ambitious precedent for future generations, and normalize flexible work policies for all. So I read that. My first response was, okay, yes, that's exactly what I'm going through right now. Like I could feel it, right? I was born in 76. I'm 45 years old. My dad didn't really do dishes, didn't change. I don't think he changed the diaper, right? Right? And, you go back to the 50s, 60s, sure. And it's like, I do dishes. I can't imagine not being with my kids as much as I am. Like I want to be more, right? I just couldn't imagine. And I hear stories of like my dad's generation, and they literally, we weren't there during, when you were born, or they were on the job site, all construction workers. They weren't, we couldn't leave the job. So I got to the hospital the next day, or your mom was, the family took care of that. And I was like, that kind of blows my mind a little bit. So, anyway, when I read that, I sort of was like, well, I feel that sort of tension. I feel like maybe this is just overanalyzing, but I feel like I'm sort of between, I think I wrote this in my notes I sent you. Me personally, I'm sort of in the middle of this transition where go back to the 50s and, men were different. There was an expectation, women versus, in the home, men outside the home. That was sort of understood. Now, if you go, I don't know, in my head, I'm sort of fast forwarding in 50 years from now, maybe 20, 30 years from now. I don't know what it's going to look like, but all I know is I feel like we're sort of in this, what's the better balance? We're trying to figure it out. And I think those of us that are trying to do it healthily is a good thing. But I don't know. So that statement, I mean, what did you, I guess dig into that statement a little bit. What do you feel like, what's the drivers there for all this that's happening?
I mean, it's a good point. I'm I guess what you'd call a geriatric millennial, right? So, and I still feel, as you just mentioned, that I'm in the middle of this transition between my dad's and generation and maybe the younger 20-somethings. But I'm in between, but I'm listening to the younger generations, the 20-somethings. And look, I'm listening to my wife. I'm listening to the female colleagues that I work with and the women that I work with in my practice as well. And I think each generation has its mission. I think millennials are picking up on what Gen Z is bringing. Gen X is picking up on what millennials are bringing to the picture. And I see it like this, that women, are looking to unshackle themselves from the societal confines of their mom and grandmother's faith. And to me, that's righteous. Maybe initially when you think about some of the things that they're saying, I could get defensive, right? And I have. But when I've taken time with this, and my thinking here is that women are being assertive. Women are asking for what they need. They're doing the things that, traditionally men have done. They're being transparent and forthright and assertive, and they're not being passive about this. I respect that. I deeply respect that. They want more. They want to share the responsibilities in an equitable way, not 50-50, in an equitable way that gives them a sense of wholeness about their life. So to me, it's like, that's what this growing call is about. And all I can say is that I'm listening. I'm trying to figure it out as much as the next person,
right,
as the next guy is trying to figure it out. But I've come along with them at this point to say, you know what, like, and that's probably because I have daughters too. Yeah. It's not completely selfish, but it's part of that. I'm thinking about their futures and their ability to have equal pay, their ability to have a partner or a spouse who is with them during the early phases of their pregnancy. Thinking of myself as a grandfather is a little weird, but yes, I'm thinking. Yeah, I'm thinking about that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about that.
Yeah, you said something that's interesting. Equitable, not 50-50. So that just got me thinking, because I do tend to think, I'm an engineer by day, so I always tend to think in more discrete terms sometimes. And I like this reason I love this podcast is because I think in the gray, where in my work I can't. Gray is not good. Gray's bad. Gray's makes things not work in my day job. But so what do you mean by that? Like, I mean, I know what you mean, but expound on that a little bit, because I think it's, again, personal story. My wife and I are, we've been lucky enough where she's been able to stay home with the kids. They're 6 and 8 now. That's been an amazing blessing to have someone focused on the amount of work that it takes. You all hear it's great. Yeah, it's a lot, but you don't really realize how much it takes to keep all this stuff running until you have someone that can't do it. And, this past year, she ended up going to work full time with the kids at school. It was a very equitable thing. Not to overuse that term, but it worked out very well for us. But, but she wasn't, but she went from literally, being able to be home and do all the stuff that's required with the kids, with the house, and all the things that surround that, to being gone from Monday morning, basically until Friday night, like a normal work week, which we haven't had as a family in a long time. And we just recently started saying, man, this balance is off. This is not, it doesn't, it's not. And I have a lot of flexibility, and I can help here and work from home and do things like that. But, we ended up having this conversation a little bit, and we both were on the same page where she's going to pull back a little bit at work. And work's been very, very generous to give her a lot of options and stuff. So, but it got me thinking, like, it's like the 50-50 thing is just a false way to, it's just a bad way to think about it. So when you said equitable, not 50-50, I'm like, oh, well, put a little more meat on that, because I like that. Yeah.
Yes. And the conversations that you're having with your wife are important. We all need to have them regularly, check-ins about the household organization that we're both assuming that you live with your partner. And even if you don't, even if you're in a divorced situation, it's still important to have these co-parenting conversations so much as you can, so much as it's possible. Yeah. So when I say 50-50, it's like it never works out that way, because as a couples therapist, I'm constantly facing situations where people are in power struggles about who does more.
Oh my gosh,
in the house. Yeah. And I always say, look, I am not a referee. I cannot determine who has actually done more of the dishes or who cleans more. I just can't. So to me, what matters more is that this buzzword, I know it's a hot word now, but it's equity. And it's like, you want to achieve the best possible outcomes for each person. And that might mean that someone does a disproportionate amount of housework or care work, and the other one does more paid work. It may be that. So it's more about finding an arrangement that preserves the dignity of both parties. That's the way that I see it. It's, if you think about it as like a kid in school, just to use an example, if all the kids at school have equal arrangements in terms of their resources, that doesn't account for the diversity of the individual kid who may have a learning difficulty. So we want to provide things for that kid to supplement and make it easier for them to learn and thrive. It's the same sort of thing with the division of household labor, is that we want to create it in a way that works for our lives. If one person works more in the office, that's going to change how much he or she is doing the dishes or managing the kids' schedules.
Right.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's more nuanced.
It is more nuanced, and I think it takes, assuming just a simple traditional, setup. We got a man and a woman in a house with a couple of kids. It does take, first of all, everything's work, right? So everything is conscious. Hey, evaluating, hey, how's this working? Should we readjust? I would say, I feel like just looking at my friend, across my circles, I do notice most of them do it pretty well. Where I have friends where the woman is into say she's a lawyer or other like high paying job. And going back to preserving the dignity of that person. That person is really passionate about they spend a lot of money on law school and a lot of studying and a lot of sweat equity. They want to continue that, right? Just because they have kids, they're not going to go, oh, I want to do dishes now. Some may, but I noticed in those situations, and in this particular case, I'm thinking they're a great couple. The husband really takes sort of okay, well, I'll do more of that, the house type stuff because my job is less demanding, and it's like you're the breadwinner. I think it works if both parties are engaged to understand that ratio is not a 50-50 thing, or it's just more of, hey, how are we being equitable to each other and to the whole, to the enterprise, if you will, right?
Yes.
Yes. But does it get complicated in a sense where, assuming that, both parties are, they're having those conversations, healthy relationship for all intents and purposes, but for example, a man taking that back seat, say, okay, I'm not going to be the breadwinner. Is there a nagging biology behind there that's making it harder for him to say that vice in general? There's exceptions all over the place, but or maybe it doesn't even have to be in general. Maybe it's a case by case basis. But I feel like I just can, for me, I feel like I would have a problem with that just because of my makeup and I got to be the one out there crushing it, quote unquote. And I have and that's kind of our more traditional setup we have in my house, but that's just the way it worked out. My wife's she's more into people. I'm more into things, that kind of thing. So, is there a biological aspect to it that makes that back and forth harder?
I think biology influences it, and that's actually not my area of expertise. I think I can speak to the nagging psychology of it, and we can talk more about the interplay of psychology and biology too. But to me, I see that as more the pressures. I see it as the societal pressures that men do face. So there's the societal pressures, meaning that the male breadwinner model is something that we men have seen in their fathers and their grandfathers, right? It's modeled to us as the way to be. Guys like you and me are having this conversation and actually care about it, right? And I'm so appreciative that we're talking about this. I see us kind of as frontiersmen in this whole changing landscape of work and home. We don't fully have answers. That's why we're talking. Exactly. If there were answers, we would just follow the roadmap. We don't have a roadmap. That's part of the dilemma. We don't have that roadmap. We're figuring it out. So I think to me the nagging, what I'll call the nagging psychologist, just to use your term, is more about men I find have the propensity to be earners, to want to be earners in all senses of the word. They are on quest to attain sometimes real manhood. And they call it sometimes precarious manhood in my work, meaning that it could be a treacherous path. It's hard to win, easy to lose. We have to demonstrate and sometimes perform our worthiness, our masculinity, our sense of virility. And I think that can pull men to work as well. That there is a shame and a fear in men who aren't earning and providing for their families. And I think that the shame of not being a perceived adequate provider can sometimes outweigh the guilt about not being home enough.
Those are two opposing
in a lot
forces
of
for sure.
They are.
Yeah.
I see guilt as I feel bad, shame as I am bad, meaning that if I am not providing and being a protector to my family, I am not enough for my family.
Yeah.
And that is the psychology of it that I see, that is almost the default. We don't necessarily see it. So many of us, myself included, never lived in the absence of that idea. And I think by naming it here and elsewhere, we have more capacity to make different decisions, meaning that, you know what, I'm going to take time off work and come home and see my kids. I'm going to do that. It's aligned with my values to do that. So, although that's hard too, when it comes to the biology, it's harder to answer that question, honestly. I wish I could give you, I think, if you're talking about testosterone levels, I do think that does matter. And I feel like the world of psychology clinical psychology doesn't always tackle that. It was a shortcoming, actually, maybe of my training, that I didn't get a chance to learn about the interplay between biology and psychology in the way that I wanted to, in the way that I'm trying to now.
Yeah.
So I wish I could give you a better answer about the nagging biology, but I could talk about the nagging psychology.
Yeah, I would. In my head, again, this is 0 degrees to practice up, but it's almost like the psychology has to be, I would say, downstream from environment and biology. You would think. I would just think generally in the most basic sense. In my head, I'm like, okay, you have things that are going on in your head. They have to be influenced by your actual molecular makeup and what the other things that you've encountered since you've been born. I got to think.
You're right. Let me just say one thing about that.
Sure.
Is that in my space, in the rooms of change and psychotherapy in particular, that's just where I am. It's much easier to identify the social factors that influence our mind and behavior. It's harder to integrate in how testosterone or specific neurotransmitters or whatever it is about biology or even evolutionary biology. It's hard to incorporate and integrate that into psychotherapy. I find that it's a factor, it's an influence. It's really important to talk about, and it's not talked about enough in terms of men and masculinity. But to me, it's not necessarily the driver of how men can change necessarily. It's I don't know if I said that in a way that resonated.
No,
but
I
that's
got.
just
Yeah, no, I got what you said. Yeah. Well, it's true that when you sit down with the stereotype, you sit down with the therapist. The first thing they say is, the stereotype is, "Hey, tell me about your childhood." It's not, "Hey, let's take a blood test," to see if you're, they're not looking for blood markers to see what could make you be thinking. They want to go back to your environment and unpack all that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. But it's interesting because it's got to be. Yeah, there's got to be an influence there, but maybe to your point, maybe it's a lot less of an influence than if you're focused on the environment and the those influencers, you'd have more impact as a clinical professional like yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I just biology doesn't have to be destiny. It is a factor, it's an important factor, but it's not necessarily destiny.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good way to say it. But what I push back on when I hear people say, "Oh, it doesn't matter, we're all identical," and I hear stuff like that, it's like, yeah, see, now you're just ignoring data and science, right? I think the way you said it is again more nuanced and probably 100% accurate. It's not the destiny, but there's an influence there. I mean, it's got to be. I mean, it's yeah. So I won't go into the stereotypes of men versus women, but stereotypes sort of occur for reasons based on experiences of a lot of people, right? So
that's true. Yeah. I'll offer a great book if listeners want to learn more about the male brain. It's by Dr. Brezendine, I think is her name. It's called just The Male Brain.
The Male Brain.
It's a great read, and
written by a female author. Is that what I heard you say?
I think so. Yes.
Okay, interesting.
I do. But it's worth a read to learn more about just how what happens in the baby's brain and adolescents and teenage brains of what she also wrote a book, I believe, double check this, called The Female Brain. So it's she has that perspective that I think is good to read.
Yeah. And I wrote you a note too as I was kind of doing a lot of research. I definitely felt what did I say? I definitely felt the because I got into I went down some rabbit holes of I remember when that what's his name from Google gosh, I'm forgetting his name, the dude that wrote the book, James hold on, I'm going to Google this is going to bug me. James Lamore, nope, Google men, women, hold on. What the heck was his name? Killing me.
I think I know what you're referring to.
Yeah, but oh my gosh, this is killing me. This is boring to the listener, but anyway, anyway, I have it right here. Stand by. Google. James Damore. There we go. James Damore. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know if you're familiar with that article, but well, actually, are you?
I'm not. I know of the article.
Okay.
I've heard some commentary on it. I feel like I would be treading into territory that I'm uninformed if I spoke too much about it. But if you want to give me and listeners just an overview of it.
Yeah, it was basically the whole, I don't know. Again, I also don't know a lot of the details, but I just remember hearing on a bunch of podcasts, and it's a while ago, so my details might be fuzzy. But he basically wrote a pushback to why there's more. They were trying to. I think the position was there's less women in tech because we, Google, and other tech companies aren't doing good enough job with equity and things like that. And his perspective was not really. The data doesn't support that. Men are interested in different things than women are. And from what I know, now I might have been missing a detail too, he was very, very fair and data driven, and he didn't seem to have a sexist bone in his body, from what I heard. And he got attacked. He got fired immediately, which I think was just a scapegoat Google thing. Like, hey, well, all right, well, we're not gonna accept this backlash that's about to come. We're gonna let him go. And he ended up, and he was on Rogan's podcast, and he certainly got a lot of attention for it. But it got me down these rabbit holes of that and other things where, again, I like. Again, I'm an engineer. I like the data. I like to see what the science. And sometimes the political aspect of it's like, oh, you shouldn't talk with that, and I like to ignore all that and just be rooted in true intellectual curiosity, overlaid with compassion for whatever the topic is. For great, we're all humans. We're all people. And if the data starts to show stuff that's inconvenient, well, I don't care. As long as it's just data, and it's as long as it's presented and explored with compassion and fair and view, I feel like we should all be doing that. Sometimes I think some of us, a lot of the mainstream quote unquote scientists, and it ends up being colored by the agenda of the day and things like that, which I think is just a disservice to science in general. But that being said, what I guess my point was on that giant tirade was, or rant was, I could feel sort of the, because different between men and women, and should men be more involved in the household versus just Googling around, right? And I felt, I don't know, and maybe this is my own bias is creeping in, which I'm always trying to be cognitive of, or recognize. I felt like I could see the tone in some of the articles, trying to make the point where there's no reason why men and women don't have the exact same drivers, the exact same. I don't know. It seemed to go a little too far, and it started to pivot instead of being just more fair and honest about things. It seemed to have tilted more that men are sort of the problem in why and I was like, well, I don't now if there's truth there, let me see it. But I kind of might have been my own bias. And I don't know. You have a very fair perspective on this stuff. That's apparent. So do you see you have to almost are in a lot of these conversations, a lot of these positions you make? Do you feel like you're starting at zero, or you're starting at -2 to make some of these points and discussions and what I'm saying? I don't know if I said it well, but
yeah, I think I get the general premise of what you're saying. There are people out there men and women and everything in between, who have a lot of contempt and resentment towards men and the patriarchal structures or perceived patriarchal structures. And there are some people, yes, who you can sense that contempt in what they write about men. I feel that maybe with a headline like "The End of Men," right? I think that, or that why do we need men? That sort of sentiment.
Right.
I do see that. I do recognize
I've seen actual articles titled, what you just said, right? You're referencing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and obviously there's much more in that article than just that title, and sometimes clickbait titles can mislead. But there is a general, so that's out there, and I do see that. But then there's also the perception from men, the interpretation that someone is going to try to strip them of their maleness or condemn them to, what a therapist once called a colony of lepers, right? Like the bad men that we see, the Harvey Weinsteins, or the people who have just like objectively done really, really terrible things. And so I do see that fear in men, that somehow they're being stripped of their maleness. And I see that sometimes just as there are instances where someone may have a sentiment where they're trying to do that, but I feel more often than not, it's the fear of that.
Interesting.
And I think men do have a sensitivity towards having the essential essence of who they are being taken away from them. And oftentimes in psychotherapy, there's, understandably so, there's a fear that if I do psychotherapy, or if I go into more emotional realms or try to be vulnerable, I'm somehow going to be stripped of my maleness.
Oh, yeah.
So these conversations can be fraught, controversial, and but as you said, I want to learn about the biology of it. I want to look at the data, and as social scientists, we ought to be considering the data, maybe more than we do. I can't speak exactly to what you were talking about with the Google thing because I just don't have enough information, but I believe that psychology in clinical psychology especially, would benefit from more of an interdisciplinary approach, looking at anthropology, neurobiology. It needs to be more all-encompassing.
Sure.
So I think what you're noticing is a fair critique on the psychology of men and masculinities as it stands.
I think if we're truly compassionate and sincere in what we're looking for in the data, it should be okay, no matter what we find. It's just one thing that there's bad actors everywhere, and I think the rest of us get sort of caught up and stamped as one of them when we're not all. Some of us are truly intellectually curious and just want to find with the information. And then when we find data that supports something that's not convenient, that helps us. Maybe that's going to only help us address whatever issues at hand we're talking about. If it's inequality, if it's men versus women, if it's whatever it might be, that data is going to help, is it not? I mean, when I graduated engineering school, there was 2 women in the whole, right? Now, could that have been a lot of societal pressures prior to when there were kids? And maybe, sure. But say that, and by the way, the ones that were there were rock stars. I mean, just like, I would not want to go against it. They were awesome. Yeah. I mean, like just brilliant, very, very, I just remember them. I'm not just saying that to be convenient on this conversation. They were just like amazing. Just like, wow, that brain is extra powerful.
And my experience in social sciences and clinical psychology was kind of the flip of that. I'm often one of few men in my training with groups of female colleagues.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And there is something like, who could deny that men on average tend to be interested in things more than people, as you said. I happen to be, someone who's more interested in people, right? That is a feminine part of me, I suppose, or traditionally part of me. And I own that. I've always been that way. And that did lead me into clinical psychology versus something like what you did. More engineering based. Right. So yes, I think on average, if you take a random group of a sample of men, maybe you'd find that more of them are interested in things, in people, and that certainly has an effect on what they choose. I think that it's important. Again, it's a 50-50 thing. Sorry, it's not a 50-50 thing. It's an equitable thing, meaning that like we want to make it available. We want to give people the opportunity to achieve their aspirations and dreams in their careers.
Right.
And then if it's not going to pan out exactly the distribution that.
Yeah, and I think that was 50-50 one of the main points out of James Damore's a paper that he wrote, his article he wrote, was that there, no matter what you do, there's still going to be less women interested in doing my job. He's an engineer. They're just going to be they should be celebrated for that. If there's going to be more women that want to be nurses, if that's truly the case, where they truly take a sample of 100 and 75 say I would like to be a nurse, if money and societal pressures were all gone and you just had a pure, then they should be empowered to do that, right? That's freedom, individual, right? Should be. So that was kind of one of his points too. And again, I didn't look into a lot of the hard data that he presented to, but it did seem like he got an unfair rap there. But now you mentioned.
Well, I'll take a look at it.
Yeah. It's in the links of one of the links I had sent you, so you can dig into that. The other thing you had said, I kind of wrote as a sort of a common theme here, and this is pointing the finger back at us men. I feel like a lot of our desire to, again, going back to your blog in terms of the men's, the traditionally the man is outside earning money, traditionally the woman's to keep taking care of the home front. Now that ratio is obviously shifting, and we're talking about that balance and where it is, and I think that a better balance of that, getting out from underneath the societal like sort of stereotypes, is a good thing for all of us, right? All of us. But I some of the things that you had written, some of the things I had seen, it's like the men struggling for that balance, struggling to, you had said a couple times, the soul sucking work hours, or the and the sort of this fear of being outmanned at work. Like there's so many things, and I've gone through a lot of this stuff personally, and I've had to do a lot of self-reflection to figure out what's going on there. Can I blame, right? Like how much of that can I put back on myself and say, wait a minute, you got some insecurities, brother, you got to work on, because forget being outmanned at work. And because I think, and my overall question is, I guess what I'm getting at is, are there like underlying insecurities and other things we men can work on that would free us a little bit from the burden of worrying about being outmanned, worrying about missing work, worrying about getting that next promotion? Like maybe it's okay. And because most of us are kind of okay, we're blessed enough, especially in this country, our family's eating, where there's no need, and I'm sure there might be someone's listening that's in this circumstance, but for the most part, we have food over on our table, we have shelter, we have a car or two, whatever, basically. So after that, are we truly trying to provide, and do we have to provide and feed our family, or is it a little bit of an ego and thing that we need to look ourselves in the mirror and say, hey, take it easy, relax. This is on you, brother. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great question, and so it is on men in part to reimagine what it means to be a provider and a protector. You can provide income. You can also provide love and tenderness and attention to your kids. So there is a part of us as men that can really get pulled into that vortex of earning and provider anxiety. And I see it with what I call the more white collar athletes that I use that term, white collar athletes, just to say that like they work in very demanding environments where it's hyper competitive, and like the heat is really turned up in a place like Wall Street, where you're constantly looking over your shoulder, making sure you're not getting outmanned, and then there's so much money that involved that it amps up that competitiveness that a lot of men have, and the aggressiveness, the self-reliance. So it's hard to get out of that, because you feel a guy will feel like a failure if they do that. That is on them in some ways, because you're right, at a certain point they have enough food on the table. Right. What's the extra income going to do for their family? So that's within them. right? And I think the onus is on men to rethink that and change that and explore like what's deeply meaningful to you. What are your we call in psychology like freely chosen value, meaning that it's not a value that's externally put upon you. It's
intrinsic.
What's just deeply intrinsic,
Yeah.
exactly. Meaning that so much of the culture in a place like Wall Street is external, extrinsically motivated. Money, esteem, status. And like that is, you inherit that. You take that in from the outside in. And I think if men can better think about like, well, what do I deeply care about if I'm able to control, which is hard to do, for those factors? Well, I want to be present. I want to be lovingly present with my family. I want to see my kids grow up in a way that my dad didn't get a chance to see me grow up. I want to be creative too. I've never had a chance to, be a creative person. It's always about earning and making money and providing for family. Like maybe I'll take some time off work, or I'll take a class doing painting, or I'll take tennis lessons. I don't know what it is. Each person is different. So to me, it's like, it's that intrinsic motivation and finding the values that are freely chosen that I think men can look to find better paths and more healthy paths to work-life balance.
Right.
Then there's also the aspects that are not helping us, shall we say. Society still, research shows a lot of younger people would prefer to be in a male breadwinner, female stay-at-home arrangement, right? So there's that pressure. There's a pressure that women still do, in a lot of cases, want to see men who can provide resources for their family. Like that's attractive. That's sexually attractive to women. And I said that in my article too, that like, I don't have the answer to that question, Vinny. I wish I did, like how to reconcile
I can add a little
that.
color there. That is no doubt, from what I've known, again, I guess I'm not certified to say this, but that is completely evolutionary based, right? If you had a man that was powerful, strong, had resources, you were going to survive. You and your surrounding tribe would be better. That I've never seen any data to the contrary that I found valid. But so again, they get to the biology, so there is something there still. Now, another thing I drew sort of, and I kind of drew it on a piece of paper. Like if you go that, even our biology changes over whatever. It takes a lot longer, but it changes over time. But what we just talked through are there. I'm wondering how these conversations change. If we were having this conversation in the 1950s, right? You got the honeymooners, like to the moon, Alice, right? I mean, can you imagine writing a sitcom today where the man holds his fist up to his wife? I don't really think that would go over so well, right? And obviously Ralph came home and there she was doing the dishes, right? It's very, very, very traditional. You go to today where you and I are talking. Obviously, we're in this. It's much different. And then again to the future, I wonder. It's like I wonder how this conversation will change throughout the decades. But also, what popped out at me is the economic reality and paradigm of the people in question. Okay, capitalism. That's where we live. Obviously, killing yourself for money is rewarding or has an incentive with capitalism, right? Because you have that super high risk to reward ratio. Is there data that everything that you're seeing? I don't know. Maybe you haven't looked into it, but in more maybe in the Switzerlands and in a less capitalistic type environment, is there more of this basic balance because the men don't have as much of a drive to go start a business and make tens of millions of dollars and triple mortgage their house because they really want to just whatever it might be that you find in capitalism because it has that incentive structure. I was thinking about that too. It's like, I only know capitalism, born here in the United States, and I live in the DC area. It's competitive as anything. That's all I know. But I'm thinking, what if that wasn't the case and everyone's basic needs were met and you kind of just were surrounded by a bunch of artists and people that surfed or something? I don't know. I mean,
some of the dynamics I've talked about male psychology, I think, do exist cross-culturally, and there's been books written about that. I think the book Manhood in the Making by David Gilmour wrote. I think he's an anthropologist, and he wrote about just how manhood exists across cultures, and that idea of precarious manhood that I was talking about is something that exists across cultures. I get the sense, and I don't have the data with me here, but that capitalism turns up the heat on competitiveness and productivity, and great things came from capitalism, of course. But I do think that does make it more difficult. Capitalism may make it more difficult for men to strike a balance between work and home, to help resolve that dilemma that I'm talking about in my article. There are pressures from work for men that make that difficult in a capitalist culture, meaning that guys who take paternity leave get directly and indirectly penalized too. That is a problem. That's why I'd also talk about the importance of paid leave as paid medical and family leave for men. They need to take it. The higher ups need to take it because that trickles down, sets a precedent that we don't have to always align with the work capitalistic culture that we have here in America. That it takes the alphas in the workplace to say, you know what, I'm going to put aside my drive to win for a moment for the sake of something bigger. It is modeling a healthier way to live, in my opinion. So that speaks to it a little bit. I see it in psychotherapy as well, that there's pressure on men sometimes. They feel that pressure. They perceive the pressure that even if they have so much privilege and so many, if I'm working with someone who has a lot of financial means, that they will hear something from a partner, from a wife or family member, whomever. I wish that we could have, a bigger apartment, or wouldn't it be nice if we could get that thing, that car, or that house, what materialistic thing. And they're not saying it by saying, that person isn't saying it to make the guy insecure, but the man will hear that as, I'm not enough. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I need to work harder. She's telling me that I am not enough. That's where that provider anxiety can come in. And I think that they might look left and right and see people who do have those nice things, fancy things, whatever it is. And that puts pressure on them as well. And that leaves them working harder maybe than they would have, and turning to work as opposed to turning to home. So that's just another factor. And I'm not putting, this is on men, right? I'm not putting the onus on women not to say certain things, but I think the way that men hear that and interpret it does relate to this capitalist culture that we live in.
We men, we're like problem solvers, right? We want to immediately, we hear something, all right, how do we fix it? And then we start engaging.
Totally.
Right? When I find most of the time, at least when my wife and I are talking, she just wants me to listen and literally say nothing or say, I hear you. That sounds difficult. Wow, that's crazy. And I'm like, all right, well, why did she say that? You should have said this. Here's what we should have done. All right, next time she calls you, it's like, wait a minute. And then it usually does not go well. It's what? I don't.
You're right.
Have you seen the video with the nail in the head, the nail on the forehead sweater, getting caught in the sweater kind of thing? Did you see that?
I don't think I have.
Dude,
but
I'm going to send it to you. It's okay. You'd appreciate just in your line of work and how your brain works. You'd absolutely.
Yeah. Please do send.
I'm going to take myself a note. I'm not even going to try to just give you the gist of it, because it'll be I won't do it justice. But so
good.
It's so good. Oh my gosh! But oh man, there's a couple other points I wanted to jump on here real quick. Well, I guess just trends wise, are you seeing? I know when I was in my 20s. I wouldn't even be having this conversation. I'm like, what? That sounds. I've even had friends since I started the podcast. Sounds like you got a lot of foofy topics on there. Those are my old school friends, right? I'm like, come on, and they're great guys. They are, and they love, they love their wives. And they're amazing dads, and they have daughters. But it's just that a lot of foofy. This is foofy, men and women, and
Sure.
And I'm like, well, first of all, now in my 20s, I would it's foofy, right? 30. Now I'm like 45. Okay, starting to be like, okay, can we stop the bullshit? can I just be me? Like, you know what I mean? So it's a real, and that's one thing I enjoy about getting older. You kind of care less about that other crap. That's
Mm-hmm.
really just, man, if you really cared too much about that,
Yep.
it sends you down a wrong path. But so do you see the trends going in the right direction? Are more men sort of having these conversations? I mean, and do you see, because I mean, sort of the backdrop to your whole blog here was, okay, women want to do more of what men were traditionally doing. They want to get unshackled, to use your terms. And
Mm-hmm.
men sort of, I think, maybe in a lot of ways want to kind of, not everyone, but would probably appreciate being more involved in the home. And I certainly do. Sometimes it goes a little,
Yes.
I have some issues with it because like I got too much work. But for the general, ratio we have here, I think is a great balance. So it seems like those whatever the scales are tipping back in a better direction. At least the trends are. Are you seeing that? Are you seeing the positive trend?
I am seeing that. I work with men who just want to strike a better balance between work and home. It's actually, we have a choice as men. Like, I see this time as less subjugating and dominating, and less of that attempt that I was talking about to strip me of
Yeah.
my maleness. And I see this exciting in a way. I am trying to reframe that too for men. Like, this is an opportunity for us to be more whole. I mentioned that in the article, meaning like balanced. We, if we offer up balance to our partners and the people that we love, that offers us balance. That gives us, they see us doing that for them. They'll want to do that for us. Here, take a class, be creative, join a team. So one of the things that I would suggest to any listeners out there who are wondering like about these things is that as a man, find other men to interact with, shoulder to shoulder, face to face, heart to heart. Find groups of other men. It can be psychotherapy. It cannot be psychotherapy. It could just be a men's group, or it could be a poker table. It could be a basketball game. A father group. It's just that is a way of connecting with other men, having the conversations that we're having right now. It's needed. And so, be competitive. I think that's a part of it too, is that it's healthy to be competitive. It's men interact in different ways. We love one-upsmanship. We love ribbing, banter. That is bonding. Sometimes that's tenderness.
Yeah.
Sometimes the line between aggression and tenderness is hard to see. And
that's hard for
I
men,
think
right? This is very hard, right? I know you have a whole nother blog about that, and I'm sure you do a lot of work in this in your practice, but there's that stigma associated with, right? And because I 100% agree with you. And again, sitting down with other men and having men to hug, to cry with, to talk about your problems with, just the concept of that, it's like, it's just, and I know some of us are better at it than others. I have some guy friends that are just, oh yeah, you should join our men's group. And they've been doing it for decades, since they were young. And now I'm starting to see, they were right. Like, I'm seeing it now, but a couple of decades later, but it's just hard. Probably goes back to your upbringing, I'm sure it goes a lot, but, I think the more we do that, a lot of men I noticed, and I fell into this trap, really had, I'm an extrovert in some ways, but a lot of me is an introvert. Like, I really enjoy being alone in my office, and that's where I do my refreshing and all that, recharging, whatever you want to say. But I found myself where I had, work folks and my wife were the only kind of outlets I had. And when, that doesn't work well, because you can't talk about, there's just, you need another unbiased, perspective. And those two aren't, they can only help in so many different ways. So, I found that huge hole I had. It was like, wait, where are your true male local, friends? I have a lot of friends that are more remote, but local here where I can go, hey dude, I got a problem. We got to talk. Like, yeah.
And to that point, sometimes it's helpful to men to be able to compete with one another and, joke around, to then be more vulnerable and talk about the things and the hurts that are going on in their life. That is one of the things that I want to make sure that I share with your listeners, is that we need to identify the male strengths, and not just focus on the deficits of men. And that's my critique of what's going on out there, is that we can focus on the aspects of masculinity, power and control and toughness and self-reliance. That's important. That's out there. But we also, I think it's really important to shine a light on the strengths too, because that will get men to more level. When you humanize men and you see them as people who care and are loving, and recognize that we relate with each other in culturally distinct ways. We care in other ways. Our self-reliance is sometimes very, very helpful in certain instances we could talk about. We have, we use humor. We sometimes do heroic things as well. The professions that we enter into, they're some of the toughest professions, right? And you look overseas, you see men staying in the Ukraine to fight. There are aspects, I think, that of masculinity and being a male that we need, that in psychotherapy I really try to identify those strengths. I want to see what's working for men before I start to talk about what isn't and explore what isn't, because I think that sets up a foundation for men to be more vulnerable. Yeah.
One buddy I had talked to, I did a podcast with a while ago, Ryan Mickler. He was from the Order of Man podcast. He made a good statement. He's like, I feel like society's putting men right now, it's like behind glass, and it says, for emergencies, break here. You know what I mean? And he's, and I was like, that's a really good analogy, because there is a lot of good behind that glass, and you need, just like men need women, women need men. We all, we need both. It's crazy if you just separate all the crap. We have such strengths when it's like a 1 + 1 = 3 thing. When you can really, I take I'm blessed to have an amazing wife. If I take her out of the equation, all my strengths and all my weaknesses would tilt me so far to one side, I would be half broken half the time. And the same with the others, with her. Like if she wasn't doing her things, and because it really is a great synergy that you need. It's a lot of work because you want to pull each other's hair out for 20% of the time, I'd say on average. But it's just that it's really, I do see strengths in her that I just do not have, and vice versa. And I think I just feel like whether they're biology based or just individual characteristics, whatever it might be, it's just I don't know, but yeah. So that's good that you're seeing that, and I think hopefully conversations like this are helping, where men are kind of like, all right, maybe the stigma is kind of BS. And I think the younger generation, by the way, I think they're way ahead of at least where I was in my, say, 20s. I think I think the old school stigmas that I grew up with are sort of going away, at least in some of the circles I have, and I think that's a good thing.
I think so too.
That's cool.
And I see it, and I see it with just the uptick in men's groups out there, organizations, nonprofits, startups. They're based around men, helping men and masculinity. You see it in professions too. There are more dad coaches out there. There are more stay-at-home dads. There are more gender strategists. There's all these new job titles that are cropping up based around trying to bring men, get them more involved, more of a fuller participation in home life. And emotional expressiveness.
One thing I noticed, and we can close in a minute here. One thing I noticed when my wife started working more outside the house, I started working more inside the house, and we ended up becoming closer because I started seeing her world, and the struggles, and wow, I'm like, these freaking dishes don't end. I just finished, like simple things like that. But then you extrapolate it to some of the more complex things, and she was having to go through some things at work, political and a lot of people problems stuff. But I've been a quote unquote leader in my organization for quite a while. So I could help her things, she could help me with. So it's like we started seeing each other's worlds. Like she put my glasses on, I put her glasses on. So that kind of brought us even closer. So I think that was a good thing, that if you, as opposed to you have a husband work or whatever, one spouse is working outside the home 100% in quote unquote, whether whatever, white collar, blue collar world, and then the other one stays inside the house. They kind of are living on different islands, and then they need those 2 hours a day to talk to each other about what happened there a day, because you don't understand each other's world. Whereas if you kind of mix a little bit, again, not 50-50, but whatever's
Totally.
equitable for both. It seems
Yes.
to be like you understand the other person better. That's what I've noticed.
You're exactly right. And that, to go back to your first question, I think the call for men for fuller participation from men also is in part from COVID in the last few years, that the line between work and home, for those of us who were lucky enough to be able to work from home, right, which is a huge privilege, is that the line between work and home blurred, and because it blurred in negative ways, in the sense it knocked a lot of women out of the workforce, which is terrible, and put them into it increased the amount of work that they ended up doing at home, even if they were the breadwinner. Sometimes I think there's a disproportionate amount of care work that and housework that women do, even when they are the breadwinners. So I think that we got a chance to see each other so much as we live with each other. Oh my gosh, like there is so much, as you said, the dishes never end. We got to see our partners as they're in their work roles. I got a chance to see my wife at work. I was so impressed by the way that she conducts herself and her leadership. I saw her anew. That experience of being able to be in the other room and kind of like hearing calls and walking in and out, it made me just appreciate her role as a working mom. And I can't deny that, can't unsee that.
Yep.
As we move back into more of that traditional arrangement of going into work or hybrid, I can't unsee that.
Yeah. Well, it's also your perspective too, right? You just have people got to work on their perspective. Some people are just sort of negative Nellies, but so you looking for the positives there. But and just being cognizant of how we think and our biases and the lenses that we see everything in. I just, I kind of take it as second nature that a lot of people just don't realize they have a lens. I've said it to someone, I think it was actually this week at work. Like, it's funny. It's like you look at the world, you look at other people, and you just assume they're viewing you the way you would view you if you were them. And it's like, no, they have an entirely different filter that you don't know what it is. They're seeing the same photons coming at them, as light, but how it gets filtered and turns into data, you don't know. You might know. But it's just so I just love that concept that we don't know how others are really perceiving the world, and it's not even sort of related to what we're talking about, but it just helps. Like you said, you started to seeing your wife in a whole new light, and it's neat.
Totally.
And then you were you were cognizant enough to see yourself seeing her in a different light. That kind of meta. You stepped aside yourself.
It's meta. Totally, and it's perspective taking.
Yeah.
Right. We got that 10,000 foot view. As much devastation as COVID has caused, I think some of the silver lining is we're getting that perspective.
Yeah.
And it's been a lot.
I just wish freaking
with
humanity
parents.
would have come together. There's a global pandemic. It doesn't give a crap if you're gay, tall, fat, trans, blue, purple. It's going to kill you. And we're like, oh, we should be even more divided. Come on, dude. People, come on. It's like,
yeah.
I mean,
tribalism has no bounds.
It's true, yeah. But I always joke if the aliens come, we'd all unite. But I'm like, COVID was sort of like a mini alien, but it didn't really do what I thought it would do. But
maybe not. Maybe not.
Well, I still have hope, Jett. We're gonna get through this together. But hey, I love your work. I appreciate it. Keep doing what you're doing, and this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate the conversation. So
it's been a lot of fun for me. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely.